Hello, I'm Violet Manners and welcome to Hidden Heritage, the podcast that brings you inside Great Britain's favourite destinations, with help from custodians, historians, artisans and experts. This week on the podcast, I meet British figurative artist, best known for her landscape, portrait and still life paintings and oils, Phoebe Dickinson. In 2021, Phoebe was awarded the RP Award at the Royal Society of Portrait Painters for her portrait of Althena. In 2022, she was awarded a Certificate of Excellence at the Portrait Society of America. Phoebe has most recently done a solo show of the great houses and gardens of England, documenting some of Britain's most iconic houses, the people that live in them, and how these houses are restored and run so they survive in the modern day. In today's episode, we're going to explore Phoebe's work on this project, her beginning in the art world, where she draws her inspiration, and how important heritage is broadly to her work. We also discuss her exciting plans for the future and how art can be a force for good in the fight for preservation. Phoebe, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Let's jump right in.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So first of all, Phoebe, I've just done a very, very brief intro on you, but you're much better placed to share with our listeners a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm an artist and I mostly spend my time doing portraits, but I also love doing landscapes and still life and all sorts of other things. And I travel around the world painting people's portraits.
Amazing. And we're going to get so into the sort of detail on your amazing career to date, but just take us back to the beginning. How did you get into painting and painting specifically, given that we are on the Hidden Heritage podcast, specifically historic houses and their gardens and landscapes?
Well, my father is an art dealer. And so I was very much brought up with art being kind of a central feature in our lives. And he would take us to look at incredible houses. And even when we were watching TV programs, he would always, point out the houses that he knew and their names. And I just thought it was amazing that he knew the names of every single house. I also was very interested in art. And I think from a young age, I sort of started to lean towards wanting to be an artist. And when I was about 16, he took me out to Florence to show me an art school, the Charles Cecil Art School out in Florence. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do as soon as I left school.
Really?
So I went there aged 18 or 19. Yeah.
Wow. And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Gloucestershire,
okay.
In an old house. Mm-hmm. And my parents have spent their lives basically creating this incredible garden with follies and all sorts.
How amazing. So that must have been a huge seed of inspiration as well, just your home and the work that your parents did to sort of...
Yes, it was. And also all the paintings in the house, which, vary from being completely unknown artists and to well-known artists. And I've loved learning about the history behind, or the stories behind each thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I love about painting is sometimes the stories behind them are just so fascinating.
So true. And actually that brings us nicely on to, it'd be really fascinating to hear a little bit more about who are the sort of British portrait and landscape artists from the past that have really inspired you to date and also informed your style, because you do have such a distinct style. I'm imagining there's some huge influences that have been historically have influenced you.
Yes, there are. And it's really boring to say because so many portrait artists would say this, but John Singer Sargent is a huge inspiration to me. And he very much painted in lots of these incredible houses. And he did a lot of work at Houghton, actually, for Sybil Chumley, who lived at Houghton. Mm-hmm. And he painted the Duke of Marlborough at Blenheim. So he's a big inspiration because I think he paints beautifully. I also love William Nicholson, mm-hmm. and he painted the Plymouth family. Actually, not in their house, I don't think. He kind of made up an interior, but it's a beautiful columned room, and that's a big inspiration.
Yeah, sorry. Any others that really?
Lavery, mm-hmm. Who painted, what I loved about Lavery's paintings is they're kind of informal interior paintings, there are more formal ones, like he did the royal family at Buckingham Palace, but it's still a lot about the interiors. So it's kind of showing how people live within their homes. And I like seeing the interiors of people's houses, and that's really important to me in paintings. And I try as much as possible to show that within my own paintings, because I think that's part of the storytelling, of the person's personality, but also that point of time in history.
Yes.
And how those houses look at that moment. Reynolds, Lawrence, de Laszlo, Orpen, Raeburn, they're all inspirations, and they painted in some of England's most beautiful houses.
Fascinating. Can you just describe for our listeners, maybe your style of art?
I would say it's figurative, which means that it hopefully looks like what you're seeing, so you can hopefully tell who I'm painting, recognize the person, and it's got a classical feel to it. Like I draw influence from old artists, but it also hopefully has a contemporary feel to it too.
How do you bring that contemporary feel into figurative art?
Well, with what's in the room, sometimes that's hard if it's a really old house, but what people are wearing.
Yeah.
And the way they style their hair, even just little details like that.
Yeah, more sort of give it more of a contemporary feel. Phoebe, we're going to move on to our first recommendation from you of one of your favourite destinations. As you know, we like to ask our guests to share with us 3 of their favourite destinations. So what is your first today?
My first is Iford Manor.
One of my favourites.
Yeah, I think it would be hard not to fall in love with Iford. It's so romantic and creative and inspiring.
Set the scene of where it is in the country.
So Iford is a beautiful house basically like practically on a river in Iford, which is near Bradford-on-Avon. And it was I think it was Harold Pito's house.
Yes.
And he basically poured all his love for many years into creating this incredible garden. And he collected treasures from, I think, all around the world, probably, columns and sculptures and all sorts. And the garden is kind of based around all these incredible pieces that he brought back, and also architecture. There's some beautiful architecture in the garden, and follies, and they are follies, I guess. Yeah.
And also, so for our listeners as well, Harold Pito was a 18th century, landscape kind of gardener, really. And as you said, Iford's just sort of the creme de la creme of his work, because every corner you turn in that garden, it's like he is telling a story as you walk every corner you turn of that garden.
Exactly, and also you can see the love in that garden.
Yeah,
even from the current family that live there now, you can see that it's still a creative process. They're still developing it. But also what I love about it is it's not kind of immaculate and perfect and symmetrical. It's a bit of a kind of wiggly treasure trove. And I think that's so much more charming. That's what's so charming about quite a lot of the English gardens, is the fact that they you can tell they've developed over many years and they're not kind of perfectly formed.
Yes.
Which makes them more perfect.
Totally agree. Totally agree. I was just trying to actually look up his exact dates, but yeah, funnily enough, he also did the rose gardens at Belvoir as well. So he was kind of, yeah. So he was kind of like a Capability Brown, the famous landscape architect or designer. Pito was similar. And as you rightly said, he sort of went around the world collecting, particularly post-French Industrial Revolution, like collecting up all of the treasures and bringing them back. And Iford's a sort of reflection to my mind of like everything, his taste, style, because it's his own home.
And the other thing that's so great about Iford for visitors is that there's the most incredible restaurant there.
I know.
So it's a real treat to go there in the summer months and have lunch and then look around that garden.
So true. Thanks, Phoebe. That's really interesting. And I really love Miriam, who is the current sort of steward there. with her husband. They're such a wonderful team and the most fascinating. It's such a treat to go around the garden with them because they know all the stories and what Harold was trying to create by drawing visitors around it. So yeah, definitely one for our listeners to add to their list of places to go and see. So Phoebe, we're going to move to the present, to today. And jump straight into, I mean, as I mentioned in the introduction, you've been awarded by some of the most sort of famous, prestigious galleries, and you've, had some of your paintings feature in some of the most extraordinary exhibition spaces in the country and across the world. But I'd love to just jump straight in, again, given that we are on the Hidden Heritage podcast, and just tell our listeners a little bit more about your most recent solo show, The Great Houses and Gardens for England. As you've already said, gardens is a huge inspiration to you, I'm imagining, based on your childhood in Gloucestershire and in your family home. But what was the inspiration behind the show, and why did you create an exhibition about the Great Houses and Gardens of England?
Well, it really started with quite often I was being lucky enough to be commissioned to paint in portraits which were in these incredible houses. Mm-hmm. But so often I wanted to capture something that wouldn't have necessarily been appropriate for the commissioned portrait. Mm-hmm. Like I wanted to capture the room with the back of someone's head reading a book, or just like more candid moments, not necessarily the kind of more formal portrait setup. And because these houses are just so rich with creativity, like even with the curtains or the architecture, every single little detail is done by the best artisans from the past. Mm-hmm. I wanted to like focus on those things as much as the people, and so that's what made me want to do this exhibition. And Houghton, actually, which is my second choice, was a big part of that process because I had been commissioned to do portraits there, and it was while spending lots of time there that I really thought, oh God, I want to capture these other parts of the house, or
these other moments that happen in between the main sort of sittings.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so what form did the exhibition take? I mean, just share it, sort of contextualize it a bit for our listeners. And how long did it take you to sort of create this exhibition?
Well, I travelled around for about 18 months to all sorts of different houses and gardens that I found inspiring. And I did the garden paintings in the summer months, and then in the winter months I concentrated on interior paintings. And I kind of just I didn't have like a set structure or idea of what paintings I was going to do. I just let myself be inspired by whatever attracted me in each house.
How fun.
Like at Beaver, that incredible wallpaper in is the Wellington room. Yeah. So it just kind of happened organically, like that. And then I collaborated with my sister, Phoebe Dickinson, who's an interior designer, and she brought in all of her furniture, and I did it with my brother and father in their gallery. So it was a kind of family affair. So cool. And we wanted to create an exhibition space that felt like a home. So it didn't have that kind of sterile white box gallery feel to it.
Yeah. It really did feel like walking into, I mean, first of all, we should say, my sisters and I were very lucky enough to be subjects of one of your many paintings. Because how many paintings were in the exhibition in total? Oh,
well, I think there were about 60 works for sale. And then I borrowed back lots of portrait commissions.
Yeah, that you've done over the years.
That was sort of to do with great houses.
Yeah.
But thank you.
No.
It was such an honour to paint you guys.
Oh, well, it's such a treat for us to be painted by you, because you really have become the sort of household name of our generation as it relates to, portraiture and also landscapes. And I think it was such an honour to be painted by you. And just for our listeners, I mean, we went into it a little bit earlier, but how did you really... Was there a moment where you just thought, right, I'm going to really make myself known as being, this portrait artist and landscape artist, but specifically anchor into oils and also estates, and because your style does feel to some degree like Sargent, I think hugely. Was there a moment that you were like, this is what I'm going to do, this is who I'm going to
No, I think it wasn't a conscious thing at all. I think I am naturally drawn to kind of heritage and beautiful houses. It's really about beauty. And I love, as I said before, I love seeing the intricate details of those houses as well as the people. And actually, I was going to give up doing portraits.
Really?
And my husband and very little daughter, at the time she was very little, decided to go travelling around the world for 6 months. And I was going to give up portraits, and I was just landscaping around the world, trying to work out what I was going to do and have a bit of space from it all. And whilst in Chicago airport, having literally had like a 2-day travel nightmare with and we landed in Chicago airport, they'd lost our luggage, they'd lost the travel cot. We weren't meant to be in Chicago, we were meant to be in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
And it really was like a bad moment. And I turned on my phone to basically ring my mother in despair, because I didn't know where my daughter was going to sleep, on the airport floor with no cot.
Wow.
And I turned my phone on, and I had the email from the National Portrait Gallery saying that my portrait of the Chumley children had got into the BP Portrait Award. And I think that was the kind of turning moment, because I had done that portrait in such a different style to how I had done portraits previously, because David and Rose Chumley was so generous and let me have free rein about how I could do the portrait. And when that portrait got into the BP, it made me think, okay, maybe I just need to do the portraits in my own way, which was more about interiors.
Interesting.
And that's what kind of led on to where I'm at now.
That's incredible. Because I think, it'd be so fascinating to know what your thoughts are, and what do you think anyone can take or learn from the great houses that exist, and also, frankly, just any sort of historic house, heritage house of any size. Maybe in terms of like the design and how they're built, and also the historic function, or what they represent today. What do you think are the sort of things that, you take away? And also, I know your husband Luke often comes to a lot of the viewings with you, and he was certainly there when we were doing our pictures and portraits. What do you think you both take away from these places, and what can other people, do you think?
Well, what's so amazing is everyone would take something different away, because there is so much in each of these houses. It might be something, a really tiny little detail, like, or something fun, like at Buckingham Palace, there was a hidden door, secret door in the wall. Just there's so many things, but there's so many amazing stories with the history. There's so much incredible stuff to look at. There's something for everybody.
Yeah, so true. And so just tell us a little bit, you mentioned the BP Award. You've had so many other accolades. Is there a sort of particular moment besides that one where you were like, this is a huge moment for your career?
I think the exhibition that I had last November was an important moment for me, because it was the first time I've had an exhibition where I'd really kind of thought about it and worked towards it and had a proper theme, and I felt really passionately about it, and it went so well, and it just felt really kind of true to me. So
yes.
That was
definitely the feeling that you got when you walked in, because it really did feel like you were walking into a kind of private members club, basically, with the best art, with the best art covering the walls. And offline, before we hopped online to record, you were saying that people from all over the world travelled to see that exhibition.
I was just so touched by that people had made the effort to kind of come from abroad to see it. So that meant the world to me.
And do you think that, obviously it's the draw being, your art, your style, and also probably the subject matter, because I think, our heritage does resonate so far beyond our borders.
Yeah, it's kind of what England does best, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you could go back in time and retrieve one kind of great lost work of art, potentially, is there anyone or any things, should I say, that springs to mind especially?
That's such a good question. I would need to have a think about that.
Okay, well, maybe I'll give you some time to have a think, and then we can come back to it. So Phoebe, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your second recommendation now. We've kind of covered off a little bit more about the present and what you're up to. Again, you mentioned offline before we came online that you're working on lots of commissions at the moment, and presumably your commissions come from all walks of life, from all parts of the world. It's not just obviously solely in the UK.
Yeah, they are. lots of different European places and quite a bit in America. So everywhere.
Yeah. Amazing. So can we hop on to what your second recommendation is, please, of favourite place?
Yeah, but my second recommendation or favourite place is Houghton. There's so much to see there, but also because I have this lovely connection with it, or it means so much to me because I was lucky enough to paint the children there, and then later I painted Rose there. And the house is just so rich with history and incredible detail within the interior design. Well, I don't know if you can even call it interior design, but and the stone hall has to be one of my favourite rooms in the world, the William Kent Stone Hall. And it's just incredible. Like, you look at how the benches have been designed so that they're cut out around the architecture, and the attention to detail is just next level. And it's
is it circular or more of an octagon?
It's a square room.
A square, okay.
It is square, but it's like a big cube, I guess, actually. Then also there's just so much stuff to see at Houghton, that they are incredible patrons of the arts, and they have these amazing outdoor exhibitions like Anish Kapoor, and at the moment they've got the Gormley exhibition, which seems to have been a huge hit. But even when they don't have those exhibitions on, there's so much to see, like the incredible Richard Long land art that they have there, and the walled garden, which is a Bannerman garden, which is very creative and beautiful, with an antler temple. And there's so much to see there.
And for instance, it's in Norfolk, essentially, Houghton. And really is. I also just love the parkland. I'll never forget sort of driving into the parkland of Houghton, and there's white deer, which I think I'm right in saying David Cholmondeley, Lord Cholmondeley's grandfather perhaps brought in to the park. I think that's what he told me. I probably need to fact check that a little bit.
They are majestic.
But they are majestic.
Yeah.
It's like walking onto a sort of film set. It's just extraordinary.
It is, yeah.
It doesn't feel real. And the significance, as you said, for you is really that's where that's the call that you got about the Cholmondeley portrait that you did that was awarded the BP award. So it makes total sense that would be your second place. Very, very special house and very worth people visiting and seeking out. And let's move on, Phoebe, to where you're at now and sort of what projects you're working on and what you're excited about in the future. Will you continue or look into doing another exhibition like the one that you did last year in the future, do you think?
I am thinking about my next exhibition. It won't be based around like the great houses again. And I have got an idea in mind of what I am going to do. But for the next couple of years, I'm kind of booked up with portrait commissions, and I'm really enjoying doing that for the time being. I'm doing lots of exciting people and places around the world, but one really lovely one is I'm painting the three sisters that own the company Fragonard Perfumery in France.
Oh, wow.
And it's 100 years of Fragonard, I think, next year. And these portraits are to celebrate 100 years of the family business, and they will be hanging in the Fragonard Museum in Grasse. And that's just been such a fun project, which I'm still kind of working on at the moment.
That is fascinating. Because I guess that's quite interesting, because portraiture throughout the decades it has sort of captured a moment in time and captured, to your earlier point about stories and how paintings hold those stories. I mean, if I just think about our painting that you did of us, that was a moment in our time and Beaver's time. That room actually is completely being redone, the Wellington room, not as in the wallpaper's being restored, not changed remotely, but just restored.
What I loved about coming to Beaver and Castle Had is I'm just thinking of a few houses along the course of that exhibition is the changes that are being made. For example, you guys were collaborating with Giorni to have that wallpaper restored and made so that other people could do something similar. Which is just so brilliant and creative. And it's so amazing to see how the people of these houses that own these houses are still creating and making it better for the general public to come and see. And at Castle Howard, Remy Renzullo is doing this incredible kind of redecoration, and the attention to detail is, similar to how it always used to be.
Yeah, totally. But it's just, it's always fascinated me, and I think portrait art, any form of portrait I just find fascinating, really, because it does hold the stories of that time, of that moment. And I guess, in the future, do you think portraiture is important moving forwards when we live in a kind of increasingly digitalized sort of world? And is it a really important kind of thing to uphold and sustain and maintain?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Why?
It's so different from a photo. It's very hard to put this into words. Somehow, because it's done over a period of time, it's telling a different type of story to a photograph. It's not just capturing one moment; it's capturing many moments and the essence. It's hard to explain, but.
And that's why they hang in all these sort of great houses and have done throughout the centuries, to my mind, is because it's telling the fabric of anyone's home, be it a big historic house or
it's telling the story of the person you're painting. It's telling the story of the house. It's telling the story of the artist. And it's also telling the story of the materials and the way that paintings are done in this present time, which in hundreds of years might be interesting, because the techniques might say, like, I can't believe they were using that lead white, or or the paintings might have cracked in a certain way, or it's all interesting historical details.
It really is fascinating. Can art, in your mind, aid us, i.e. anyone that's passionate about heritage, these big houses like you are, the gardens that they coexist with? Can art aid us in spotlighting the preservation of British heritage, do you think?
Yes, definitely, because firstly, art exhibitions like the Gormley exhibition at Houghton would bring people to the house. So it might bring people that aren't necessarily interested in the architecture or history of a house to a house, and then they might become interested. So I think it plays a really important part. Yeah.
And what would your advice be to any aspiring artists in future generations, and that if they see your work and they're really passionate or fall in love with it, as I know so many do, where would you recommend that they start and sort of begin on their own journey of,
in terms of art schools?
And just the whole experience of getting into art? What would be your top tips?
Well, the first thing is like practice. The more you paint, it's that, what's that saying, the kind of 1,000-hour thing, or the more hours, obviously, the more hours you put in, the better you get. I would recommend the London Fine Arts School, which is a brilliant art school that I went to for many years.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you, Phoebe, so much. And please share with us your favourite final destination, if you will.
Well, this is so hard because I've got so many other favourites, but I wanted to kind of recommend somewhere where everyone could go. And I thought Leighton House Museum was a really interesting one because it's in London, so it's kind of easily accessible. It's so interesting because it is Lord Leighton. Was he Lord Leighton? Leighton's studio and home. So it's historical, it's incredible architecture, like really quite out there. Like the colours are incredible. There's amazing art to see, both by him and other artists. And you're seeing how someone lived then. I was lucky enough to be London Fine Arts School's artist in residence at Leighton House, which meant that I spent a lot of time painting there, and I really got to know the place quite well. And it's a wonderful place to paint because the colours are extraordinary.
Really? Just explain for our listeners, who was Leighton, just like layman's terms in case anyone doesn't know.
Leighton was an artist who did do portraits and nudes, and he travelled a lot and did little sketches in places like Egypt and all sorts of places.
And so this is his home that's now become...
This is his home and studio. It's a really wonderful place. And at the back of the museum, there is a garden which anyone can go to, which is a really good little secret hidden gem to go to, because if you're in London on a hot day, you could pop into that garden.
How amazing.
Just behind the studio.
I did not know that. And whereabouts in London is the...
It's just off Kensington High Street.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
That's actually a really great recommendation. We've not had someone like that recommended on the podcast.
It's seriously an amazingly cool place.
Oh, thank you so much. What a treat for our listeners to hear about that, and for me to hear about that, because I had no idea.
But I would actually also love to recommend another kind of hidden gem, which for people that are interested in heritage and want to do something really special, a good place to go to stay is Hotel Ensley in Devon, which was a fishing or shooting lodge that was owned by the Duke of Bedford many years ago. And Repton did the garden there. And so it's just an incredible place to stay, because you can walk around these never-ending gardens with grottos and all sorts to see. But also the architecture is really special on the hotel, with kind of columns made out of tree trunks, and it's a really creative place. And I've actually drawn a lot of inspiration from it for my own garden at home, with like wiggly rustic benches and things like that.
That's so clever. And I'm actually just looking at it now as you speak. And it's won 5 best hotels in the country, Telegraph Hotel Awards 2024. I mean, it looks absolutely incredible. That is definitely going on my list, and I'm sure it will many, many others.
It's very special.
So, Phoebe, we couldn't really, given you've probably seen more historic houses and gardens and landscapes in this country than, dare I say, very, very, very many others, it would be remiss of me not to try and get a few more places out of you for our listeners. So I would love to know maybe perhaps 2 gardens that you'd recommend our listeners visiting. So just give us a bit of context. Where are they in the country? We'll start with one of them first.
Well, both garden recommendations I'm going to give today are quite close to where I live. They're sort of Gloucestershire area, I think. And the first one is Kifsgate Garden, which is a very magical, romantic English garden, and really well worth a visit. And then the other one, which is much more well known, probably, is the Highgrove Garden, which I really think is a must-see, with just so much creativity and cool little features. For example, the king has kind of collected all sorts of bits of stone over the years, like carvings or odd bits of stone, and created an incredible wall out of it. Just everywhere you look, there's something to see.
So true. And I love Kifsgate as well, because I think I'm right in saying it was created, that garden, as a product of 3 generations of women.
Yeah, so cool.
It's so cool. And I love when you go onto their website, the first thing that it says is, Kifsgate, this is the product of 3 generations of women that have just completely dedicated their lives to creating this incredible garden.
Yeah.
And I think it sort of they started creating it in the sort of early 1900s, I think I'm right in saying. She says, looking at the screen at the same time. But that's such a great choice. And obviously Highgrove's such an amazing one for people to have on their radar. Did either of them feature in the exhibition that you did?
Yeah, they both did. And actually, I'm just going to give one more.
Yeah.
A place called Stankham Park, which is where you can actually rent the temple there.
Where is this in the country?
It's in Gloucestershire too.
Okay.
And I think they don't know who designed the garden at Stankham, but I think it looks like a Repton design.
Really?
If it's not Repton, it's heavily inspired by Repton. And there's a most beautiful temple over the lake, which you can rent on. I think you can rent it on Airbnb, and all sorts of little cottages around the garden that you can rent. So that's a really special place to go.
Wow, very cool. I think it's always just helpful to know, had you just assumed that it is a Repton garden? What are the kind of features of a Repton garden?
Well, okay, so lots of Repton gardens have these kind of almost cave-like tunnels made out of, I don't know what you call that stone that's kind of grotto-like. It's all probably. And quite a lot of like water features, running water going down levels, quite a lot of ferny type things. It's hard to explain, but you can really recognise the style.
You can spot the style. But it's so true. It's so true of so many of those great landscapers and gardeners like Howard Peter that you mentioned earlier. Like, it's very obvious. Once you've seen a few of those kind of gardens or landscapes, you start to just recognise the pattern a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, Phoebe, thank you so much. We've given our listeners so many more recommendations than we normally would. So it's such a treat. And I'm sure everyone will be writing them down. If not for later this year, then probably early spring. Is that when you suggest going to visit most of these gardens next year?
Yeah. It's a good time.
Yeah. Oh, Phoebe, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's such a treat to talk to you and hear more about the incredible work that you've done. You've drawn such a spotlight to, the great sort of historic houses and gardens across the country with your exhibition last November. We were so lucky to be a part of it. It was such a treat to see it. It's such a shame that it's no longer live, but people can go online and have a look at the exhibition. But thank you so much. It's been really enjoyable. Love chatting to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've loved it.